Hey everyone, Julian Cross here with Regulation Rangers, your guide to the rules that shape our world. Today, we're joined by policy expert Elena Harper, ready to decode a stack of fresh federal regulations, all hot off the presses from January 15th, 2025.
Oh, wow.
Get this? We've got everything from grapefruit pricing to AI oversight.
Sounds like a lot to cover.
You might be surprised how much this stuff actually affects your day-to-day life. So let's jump right in.
I think you'll be surprised by the variety here, Julian. We've got some pretty niche rules, but also some that could have ripple effects across entire industries, even globally in some cases.
Okay, let's unpack this. First up, the Agricultural Marketing Service, or AMS.
Okay.
They're proposing a pretty big jump in the assessment rate for oranges and grapefruit from Texas's Lower Rio Grande Valley.
I've heard about this one.
We're talking a leap from 3 cents to 4 cents per carton. What's the story there?
Well, this proposed increase comes directly from a recommendation by the Texas Valley Citrus Committee. They're likely trying to secure more funding for marketing and research to support their citrus industry.
Makes sense.
But it's worth considering how this might impact producers, consumers, and even competition with citrus from other states like Florida.
Interesting.
Could this lead to higher prices at the grocery store? Or will it help Texas growers stay competitive?
Interesting point. Now, switching gears to something completely different.
Okay.
The Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS, has a notification about a public briefing on, get this, the Framework for Artificial Intelligence Diffusion.
Wow, that sounds pretty high-tech and honestly kind of ominous.
Right. This briefing actually follows a recently implemented interim final rule on AI diffusion.
So they're already moving on this.
It's clear that the government is taking the rapid advancement of AI very seriously.
Yeah, definitely seems like it.
What's fascinating here is the emphasis on public engagement.
Public engagement.
They're inviting people to weigh in on how these powerful technologies should be regulated.
I see.
Which is crucial at this stage.
Absolutely agree.
It definitely feels like we're at a crossroads with AI, trying to harness its potential while putting safeguards in place.
Makes sense.
Now, let's move on to the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ.
Okay.
They've finalized a rule about the Office of Environmental Quality Management Fund regulations. Can you break down what this actually means?
Essentially, they're aiming to clarify and modernize the rules surrounding this fund, which is used to manage environmental projects and initiatives.
Okay.
The goal is to improve transparency and efficiency.
So streamlining things.
But we've got to ask, does this really change anything on the ground?
Good point.
Is this a meaningful shift in environmental policy? Or simply a bureaucratic reshuffling?
Good question. I'm all for cutting through the red tape. But it's important to see if this has teeth, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, now we're heading over to the Defense Department, or DOD, with a final rule that adjusts civil monetary penalties for inflation.
Interesting.
What's the reasoning behind this?
It's pretty straightforward. They're basically trying to maintain the deterrent effect of these penalties. With inflation, the bite of a fixed fine decreases over time. So this adjustment ensures those penalties continue to carry weight and discourage violations.
Makes sense.
Of course, this has implications for defense contractors and potentially impacts government revenue as well.
Makes sense. All right, let's talk about something that hits closer to home for many student loans.
Oh, yeah.
The Department of Education, or ED, has finalized a rule extending the deadline for enrolling in income-contingent repayment plans until July 1st, 2027.
Wow, that's a big extension.
What does this mean for borrowers out there?
This is potentially a big deal for anyone struggling with student loan debt. These income-driven repayment plans can offer some relief by capping monthly payments based on your income.
So it could really help some people.
But there are different plans with varying terms and qualifications if you're a borrower. I highly recommend exploring these options and figuring out which one might work best for you.
Good advice. Navigating the world of student loans can be pretty daunting.
It really can be.
Now, this next one is a bit more complex.
Okay.
The Employment and Training Administration, or ETA, has finalized a rule about the H-2A visa program, specifically for livestock herders.
Livestock herders.
This is a program that allows agricultural employers to hire temporary workers from outside the U.S. What's changed here?
Well, this final rule essentially confirms previous actions by the Department of Labor regarding the H-2A visa program and how it applies to livestock herders.
Okay.
It's a nuanced rule that delves into the specifics of determining temporary and seasonal need for herders.
Sounds complicated.
But the bigger picture is that this program has a significant impact on both domestic and foreign workers in the agricultural sector. And understanding its intricacies is crucial for anyone involved in this industry.
It's definitely a reminder of how complex and interconnected our labor market is, especially in agriculture.
Sure.
Now let's move on to the Environmental Protection Agency,
Right.
or EPA, which always has a lot going on.
Oh, they do. It seems they always have a stack of proposals and final rules coming out, covering everything from air quality to fuel standards.
They do. So, first up, they have a proposed rule about air quality in Kansas.
In Kansas.
Specifically, it deals with revisions to Kansas's State Implementation Plan, or SIP for those in the know. This plan outlines how the state will meet national air quality standards.
Okay.
Any key details here?
The revisions focus on emission inventory and fee regulations. They're establishing a Class 2 fee schedule and updating the existing Class I emission fee regulations.
Gotcha.
This is all about aligning state-level environmental regulations with federal standards,
Right.
which can be a complex balancing act. It raises questions about how effective these regulations will be in achieving the desired environmental outcomes.
That's a good point. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in Kansas.
Yeah.
The EPA also has a final rule regarding fuel quality regulations.
Fuel quality.
Is this about those ongoing debates over fuel efficiency standards?
Actually, no. This rule doesn't change the existing fuel quality standards. It focuses on streamlining existing regulations related to sampling and testing procedures.
So more of an internal change.
This is all about improving efficiency within the EPA's regulatory processes without impacting the actual standards themselves.
Okay. So a bit of bureaucratic fine-tuning there.
You could say that.
But they are proposing some changes to standards for the oil and natural gas sector, right?
That's right. This proposed rule amends the new source performance standards and emission guidelines for the oil and natural gas sector.
Okay.
It's basically the EPA's response to petitions for reconsideration of existing rules.
Interesting.
This is a complex area with high stakes, as it touches on climate change mitigation efforts and the economic interests of a powerful industry.
You can say that again? I imagine we'll be hearing more about this one in the coming months.
Definitely a hot topic.
All right. Now let's shift gears to wildlife conservation.
Sure.
The Fish and Wildlife Service, or FWS, has a proposed rule to designate critical habitat for the San Francisco Bay Delta longfin smelt.
The longfin smelt.
What's the significance of this?
This is a crucial step in protecting endangered species. Designating critical habitat helps safeguard the areas, essential for the survival and recovery of a species.
Okay.
In this case, the longfin smelt is facing numerous threats. In the San Francisco Bay estuary,
I see.
this proposed rule is part of a broader effort to conserve biodiversity and address the challenges of balancing ecological needs with human activities.
It's a reminder of how delicate those ecosystems are.
They really are.
Now, the FWS also has 3 notifications of findings regarding grizzly bear populations.
Grizzly bears.
Can you give us the rundown on those?
Sure, they're tackling the complex issue of grizzly bear conservation from different angles. They're proposing a revision to the overall grizzly bear listing, while also exploring the establishment and delisting of distinct population segments, or DPS, in 2 specific ecosystems, the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem.
So they're looking at specific regions.
Exactly. Determining whether a population qualifies as a DPS is crucial for conservation efforts, as it influences how the Endangered Species Act is applied.
Interesting.
There are various factors considered in these evaluations, including the population's discreteness, significance, and conservation status.
It sounds like a lot of scientific analysis and debate goes into these decisions.
It really does.
Okay, moving on from bears to government travel expenses.
Okay.
The General Services Administration, or GSA, has a final rule about adjustments to the miscellaneous expenses allowance. In the federal travel regulation,
That sounds like fun.
what's the gist?
They're basically fine-tuning the rules around what the government covers for employees' relocation expenses.
Oh, I see.
It's a small detail in the grand scheme of things, but it reflects the ongoing efforts to balance fiscal responsibility with supporting the needs of federal employees.
I imagine every little bit counts when you're dealing with government budgets.
Absolutely.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security,
Or
DHS, always a hot topic,
always.
has a proposed rule about protecting federal property.
Protecting federal property.
What's the gist here?
This one is still in the proposal stage, but it's interesting because it involves collaboration with the GSA.
So multiple agencies are involved.
They're essentially looking to establish clearer regulations for safeguarding government buildings and assets, likely in response to evolving security concerns in recent years.
It makes sense that they're taking a closer look at security measures.
Sure.
All right. Let's talk about the Internal Revenue Service,
Okay.
or IRS.
Everyone's favorite.
They've got a final regulation on clean energy tax credits.
Clean energy.
This seems timely, given all the recent focus on climate change and renewable energy.
Absolutely.
Right.
This one ties directly back to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which included provisions for promoting clean electricity production and investment.
Right, I remember that.
These final regulations provide specific guidance on how those tax credits will be implemented and what qualifies for them.
So they're laying out the details.
It's a big step towards incentivizing the transition to clean energy sources.
So this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of turning those policy goals into tangible action now. Now, the IRS also has a final rule on resolving tax controversies through the Independent Office of Appeals.
Interesting.
What's the story there?
This rule is all about ensuring taxpayers have a fair and impartial review process when they have disputes with the IRS.
Yep.
The Independent Office of Appeals plays a crucial role in resolving these controversies outside of court.
I see.
This final rule provides clear guidance on how this process works and what rights taxpayers have.
It's good to know there's a system in place for resolving disputes fairly. Okay, buckle up. Because we're diving into the world of self-driving cars.
Oh.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, has a proposed rule for a program called AV STEP.
AV STEP.
Can you decode that acronym for us?
It stands for the ADS-equipped Vehicle Safety, Transparency, and Evaluation Program.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? But the goal is pretty straightforward: to create a voluntary framework for evaluating and overseeing automated driving systems.
So we're talking about self-driving cars here.
Exactly. Which are rapidly becoming a reality on our roads. This program aims to improve transparency and ensure the safety of these emerging technologies.
Sounds like they're trying to stay ahead of the curve on this one.
They are. As the technology is evolving so quickly, it's a recognition that we need a clear set of guidelines and procedures. As self-driving vehicles become more prevalent, this program is a major step towards shaping the future of transportation.
All right. Now we're back to the topic of civil monetary penalties. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, has a final rule adjusting those penalties for inflation. Similar to the DoD rule we discussed earlier.
So keeping pace with inflation.
Anything noteworthy here?
The main point is that they're keeping those penalties aligned with inflation to ensure they remain an effective deterrent for violations of nuclear safety regulations. The nuclear industry obviously operates under extremely high safety standards, and these penalties play a role in enforcing compliance.
It's a reminder of how seriously they take safety in that sector.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on to the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. They have an interim final rule about appeal procedures for Department of Veterans Affairs employees.
For VA employees.
What's this all about?
This rule stems from the Department of Veterans Affairs Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017. It establishes procedures for VA employees to appeal the recoupment of awards, bonuses, or relocation expenses.
Okay.
It's essentially about ensuring fairness and due process for these employees when facing potential financial penalties.
It sounds like they're trying to strike a balance between accountability and protecting employee rights.
Exactly.
All right. Last but not least, we have the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA.
The TSA, everyone's favorite.
They have a final rule that makes some technical amendments. 2 record-keeping requirements for criminal history record checks related to airport and aircraft security.
Okay. This one sounds more complicated than it is. They're basically streamlining existing procedures without changing the underlying security measures.
So just making things more efficient.
It's all about improving efficiency and reducing unnecessary burdens while still maintaining the necessary security protocols.
So a bit of fine-tuning behind the scenes at the TSA.
You could say that.
That was quite a whirlwind tour of new federal regulations, covering a surprisingly wide range of topics.
It was, wasn't it?
Thanks for breaking it all down for us, Elena.
My pleasure, Julian. It's always fascinating to see how these regulations impact our lives in so many ways.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, if you're curious to explore any of these regulations in more detail, you can find all the information on topic like